In the heart of Rome, beneath the towering shadows of St. Peter's, a silence fell that no one expected. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, the man once called the voice of Asia, the man who carries a gentle smile but a heavy heart, stood before the church with words that would pierce the soul of every believer, a shocking announcement, born from a heartbreaking discovery, one that reached all the way to Pope Leo XIV himself. The Vatican, already shaken by rumors, whispers of division, even warnings of deep fakes and fabricated voices, now trembled with something real, something no algorithm could create. Cardinal Tagle spoke not of politics, not of power, but of the very wound of Christ in our time. He connected his words to Pope Leo's looming exhortation, Delexit Te, the call to remember the poor, the abandoned, the forgotten. And yet, Tagle's discovery went deeper. It touched a secret hidden in the cries of refugees, in the ruins of war, in the faces of children who have nothing but faith to cling to. Every sentence landed like thunder, because Pope Leo XIV had just condemned the violence in Qatar, warning that the world was on the edge of something very serious. And now, Cardinal Tagle revealed what many feared, that the suffering of the poor is not just a social crisis, it is a spiritual warning, a message from God, that the bride of Christ herself must be purified. The faithful listened, trembling. Some wept openly, because this was no ordinary Vatican announcement. This was prophecy in real time. And as the bells of St. Peter's tolled in the distance, Tagle's final words echoed across the world. If we do not return to the wounds of Christ, the wounds of the poor, then the next silence we hear may be heaven's judgment, and at that moment, even the great ones of the Church, as the cardinals, the bishops, the scholars, looked toward Pope Leo XIV, waiting for a sign, a word, a confirmation. And what happened next, no one in the Vatican, no one in the entire Catholic world could have ever imagined. The air inside the Vatican felt heavy, not just with incense, not just with prayer, but with a storm of unseen forces colliding. Cardinals exchanged glances. Whispers echoed in the marble corridors, some trembling with fear, others burning with defiance. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle's shocking words were not just an announcement. They were a sword cutting through centuries of silence. And Pope Leo XIV, seated upon the chair of Peter, carried a face that revealed both burden and fire. He had already warned of the world's dangerous path, condemning violence in Qatar, calling for unity in a fractured church. But what Tagle unveiled was different. It was a discovery that tied the suffering of the poor, the war-torn, the abandoned, the forgotten, to the very destiny of the Catholic Church itself. The faithful gasped. Could it be? Was this not just charity, not just social teaching, but the voice of Christ resounding through the wounds of humanity? Yet, in the shadows, a secret battle raged. Hidden factions within the Vatican, ancient networks that had waited in silence, stirred restlessly. Some feared Tagle's revelation would ignite a fire that could not be controlled. Others saw in his words the confirmation of long-guarded prophecies. A few, hardened by ambition, whispered that even Pope Leo XIV himself might be forced into a choice that would shake the very foundations of Rome. The clash was not only political, it was spiritual. Demons rejoiced at division. Angels stood guard over the bride of Christ, and every prayer of the faithful became a weapon in this unseen war. Then came the twist, the one no one expected. A letter, found deep within the archives of the Vatican Library, sealed in dust and secrecy. It bore the handwriting of a saint long past, and its message spoke directly of this very moment. When the shepherd and the dove shall meet at the altar of suffering, the church shall be tested in fire, and the world shall tremble at the sound of the trumpet. The room froze. Cardinals stared at one another. Could Tagle's announcement be linked to this ancient warning? Was Pope Leo XIV the shepherd? Was Tagle the dove? Was this the prophecy unfolding before their very eyes? The bells of St. Peter's rang, louder than usual, as if heaven itself was confirming the weight of what had been spoken. Faithful gathered outside, praying, crying, lifting their rosaries toward the sky, while inside, tension thickened like a gathering storm, and just as it seemed the Vatican would collapse under the weight of silence, Pope Leo XIV rose to his feet. The crowd of cardinals hushed instantly. His voice, steady, thunderous, filled with divine authority, broke through the walls of doubt. The time has come. The bride of Christ must be purified. The church must return to the cross, or the cross itself will return to judge the church. The hall erupted, some crying out in awe, others in fear, others in open resistance. A battle line had been drawn, not just in politics, not just in Rome, but in the very soul of the Catholic Church, and beyond the walls of the Vatican. Millions of Catholics around the world, in the Philippines, in Africa, in America, in Australia, felt something stirring in their spirits. A warning, a call, a divine echo that could not be ignored. But what came next? What emerged after Tagle's discovery and Leo's thunderous declaration was more shocking than anyone could have dreamed. For in that moment, heaven itself prepared to unveil a sign. And then it happened. A sound, deep, ancient, unexplainable, rolled through the Vatican like thunder trapped beneath the marble floors. Some said it was the bells of St. Peter's tolling without human hands. Others swore it was a trumpet echoing from heaven itself. But all who were present knew one thing. This was no ordinary sound. The faces of the cardinals grew pale. Men who had spent their lives wrapped in ritual and reason suddenly trembled like children. And at the center of it all, Pope Leo XIV stood unmoving, his eyes fixed on the crucifix above the altar, as if the very Christ upon the cross was speaking directly to him. The bride of Christ, the Catholic Church herself, was being called to purification. The sins hidden in shadows, the pride of factions, the ambition of men clothed in scarlet, all of it was now under divine scrutiny. Cardinal Tagle's voice shook as he whispered, yet it carried across the chamber with supernatural clarity. This is the hour foretold. The poor cry out, the blood of martyrs cries out, and the silence of heaven is no longer silence. Some cardinals wept openly. Others clenched their fists in fury, unwilling to surrender their power. Secret factions, those who for decades had twisted the church from within, now realized their time was running out. A war had begun. Not of flesh and blood, but of spirit. The Vatican itself became the battlefield, and outside, pilgrims gathered in St. Peter's Square suddenly pointed to the heavens. The clouds above Rome split open, a shaft of light piercing through the darkness. Some saw in it the form of a dove. Others swore they saw the wounds of Christ shining above the basilica. Phones recorded it, voices cried out, but no camera could capture the terror and the glory of that moment. Inside, Pope Leo XIV lifted his hand, trembling yet firm, and declared, "If the Church does not repent, if the bride does not wash herself in the blood of the Lamb, then judgment will begin in the house of God." The words struck like lightning. It was not politics. It was not diplomacy. It was prophecy. A heavenly warning spoken through the Vicar of Christ. And suddenly, a hidden document was revealed. A sealed parchment, found not by accident but by providence, carried into the chamber by a priest whose face was pale with fear. It spoke of a secret known only to a handful of saints, that in the year of trial, when poverty and war meet at the gates of Rome, a pope and a cardinal would stand together as shepherd and dove, and the fate of the church would hang in the balance. Gasps echoed. Could this prophecy be unfolding now? Could Leo and Tagle be the very figures heaven had chosen? The clash of powers was no longer hidden. The faithful outside prayed rosaries until their hands bled. Inside, some cardinals swore allegiance to the Pope's words. Others whispered rebellion. The bride of Christ was splitting before the eyes of the world. But even then, the greatest shock had not yet come. For in that moment of trembling and tears, a messenger stepped forward. Not a politician, not a scholar, but a simple nun, her voice clear, her eyes burning with the fire of heaven. And what she revealed turned the Vatican upside down. The nun stepped forward, her habit torn from years of service among the poor, her hands trembling but her eyes ablaze. All of St. Peter's seemed to bend toward her, as if the air itself carried her voice. She did not bow, she did not stammer. She spoke with the raw weight of eternity. Holy Father, cardinals of the Church, I bring you not my words, but the words of heaven. Last night, in the silence of prayer, the Mother of God appeared to me. She showed me the wounds of Christ, still bleeding, because his bride has forgotten him. She told me, the Church must be purified by fire before she can shine again. The crowd gasped. The cardinals shifted uneasily. Some crossed themselves, others muttered that it was madness. But Pope Leo XIV leaned forward, his gaze burning into her soul. Continue, he commanded, and so she did. Her words struck like lightning. She spoke of secret sins festering within the Vatican, of factions more loyal to worldly power than to Christ, of shadows that had crept into the very heart of the bride of Christ. She declared that a shaking was coming, a shaking so violent that no throne, no crown, no scarlet robe would stand unless rooted in the cross. The silence was suffocating. Then Cardinal Tagle broke it, his voice steady, broken yet unyielding. Holy Father, this confirms the discovery I made. Documents buried in the archives revealed warnings from saints of a time when the Church's greatest trial would come not from outside, but from within. We are standing in that time. The walls seem to close in. The papacy itself, the Scarlet College of Cardinals, centuries of tradition and power, all stood on the edge of a cliff. Some cried out that this was blasphemy, that no nun could dare speak such words, but others fell to their knees, tears pouring, begging God for mercy. And then, the twist no one expected. A violent wind tore through the chamber, extinguishing candles, rattling centuries-old windows. The crucifix above the altar shone with an unearthly light, and from the lips of Pope Leo XIV came words that shook even the strongest hearts. This is the hour of purification. The bride of Christ will be cleansed. The faithful will be tested. And the shepherds who have betrayed their flocks will be exposed, cries rang out. Some cardinals collapsed in prayer. Others stormed toward the doors as if to escape judgment itself. The clash of powers was no longer hidden. It was in the open, raw, and undeniable. Angels and demons battled above them, unseen yet felt in every breath. Outside, thousands of faithful lifted their rosaries to the sky. Reports began to spread of statues weeping blood in distant churches, of hosts glowing with mysterious light, of children proclaiming visions of Jesus warning, the time is short. The Vatican had become the epicenter of a divine earthquake. The bride of Christ was trembling on her knees. The papacy stood at the threshold of history, and Cardinal Tagle, his face pale but resolute, whispered to Pope Leo XIV, Holy Father, this is only the beginning, and indeed, it was, for what came next. What was unveiled in the following hours was so shocking, so divine, so apocalyptic, that even the strongest believers would struggle to comprehend it. And then, the veil was torn wider. A document, centuries old, sealed in wax and hidden in the deepest vaults of the Vatican, was brought forth by trembling hands. Its Latin words, written in the ink of another age, spoke of betrayal within the Church. Betrayal not from her enemies, but from her shepherds. The cardinals leaned in, their faces pale, their hearts pounding. The prophecy declared, when the fisherman's successor stands between mercy and judgment, the bride will face her darkest night. Her betrayers shall wear scarlet, her wounds shall bleed from within, and only through fire will she be restored. A murmur erupted. Some shouted in denial, others gasped in terror. Could it be true that, within the very heart of the Vatican, forces had long labored to corrupt the bride of Christ? That the great clash was not with the world outside, but with the wolves hidden inside the fold? Pope Leo XIV's hands shook as he held the parchment. His voice, low yet thunderous, filled the chamber. The hour is here. and the bride of Christ must be purified. The Church cannot hide her wounds any longer. The faithful outside felt the tremor. News spread like wildfire that the Vatican itself was trembling, that a battle of light and darkness had erupted under the dome of St. Peter's. In the Philippines, in Africa, in Latin America, rosaries were lifted, prayers shouted through tears. Across the seas, in silent monasteries and crowded cathedrals, bells began to toll on their own, as if heaven itself was warning the nations. But what shook Rome most was not the prophecy alone. It was the sudden collapse of a cardinal, one of the most powerful voices of opposition. As he fell to the marble floor, witnesses swore they heard him cry out words no one expected. "Forgive me, Lord, I have betrayed you." Gasps, cries, chaos. Some rushed to his aid. Others looked in horror, realizing the prophecy was unfolding before their eyes, a scarlet betrayer exposed by heaven itself. Cardinal Tagle stepped forward again, tears streaking his face. "This is the beginning of the great purification," he declared, his voice breaking yet unshakable. "The bride will suffer, but she will rise. The Church will be wounded, but through the wounds of Christ she will be reborn." The clash of powers erupted like a storm. Factions whispered of resistance, of plots, of silencing both Tagle and even the Pope. But the faithful wept and prayed louder, drowning the voices of rebellion with the sound of rosaries clashing like swords. And as night fell over Rome, lightning split the sky. A bolt struck the dome of St. Peter's, not once, but 3 times. The earth shook, the city trembled, and those present swore they saw, for a moment, the form of a lamb shining above the basilica, his eyes aflame with judgment and mercy. The bride of Christ had entered her trial. The papacy was standing in the fire. The world was watching, and the question echoed through every heart: who among the shepherds will stand with Christ, and who will fall to the shadows? But the greatest twist, the divine surprise yet to come, was still hidden, waiting to be revealed. A secret that would not only test the Vatican, but shake the entire Catholic world to its core. The secret was unveiled, not with trumpets, not with fanfare, but with a trembling hand placing a sealed envelope upon the altar. The handwriting, unmistakable. It belonged to Pope John Paul II. Gasps filled the chamber. For decades, whispers had spoken of hidden letters, of warnings passed from saintly popes to their successors. And now, one of those very letters had been discovered. As Pope Leo XIV broke the seal, the air itself seemed to shudder. The words were read aloud, words that carried the weight of prophecy and fire. A time will come when the Church will be torn from within, when cardinals will rise against cardinals, bishops against bishops, priests against priests. The bride will appear disfigured, covered in wounds, but from her tears shall flow the river of renewal. Fear not, for Christ will not abandon his Church, but the world will know that judgment begins in Rome. The silence that followed was unbearable. Some cardinals bowed their heads, their scarlet robes shaking with grief. Others clenched their jaws, realizing the age of secrets was ending. And then, the unthinkable happened. The crucifix above the altar, centuries old, carved by hands now dust, began to bleed. Not symbolic, not poetic. Real blood trickled down its wooden arms, dripping onto the marble floor of St. Peter's. Cries erupted. Some fled in terror. Others fell to their knees in worship. Cardinal Tagle lifted his voice, echoing like thunder. "This is the sign. The wounds of Christ are alive in his bride. The purification has begun." The clash of powers exploded. Hidden factions rose in fury, demanding silence, demanding denial. But the faithful, ordinary pilgrims, mothers, children, priests, stormed into the basilica, their voices rising in prayer. "Christus vincit, Christus regnat, Christus imperat," echoed through the dome as angels and demons waged their invisible war. And Pope Leo XIV, his eyes filled with tears, his face pale with divine terror, raised his hand over the bleeding crucifix and declared, "Rome shall be shaken, but the church shall not fall. The bride of Christ will emerge purified, and the gates of hell shall not prevail. Lightning split the skies once more. Thunder rolled like the roar of eternity. And in that instant a dove descended from the heavens, landing upon the altar stained with blood. Gasps turned to screams, screams turned to sobs. For the faithful knew this was no ordinary bird. This was a heavenly sign. And yet, just as hope began to bloom, the greatest twist of all arrived. For the letter contained one final line, one sentence sealed for this very hour. When the shepherd and the dove stand united in Rome, one shall remain and one shall be taken. The crowd froze. The prophecy had spoken. One life would be demanded. One sacrifice would seal the purification. And in that instant, all eyes turned to Pope Leo XIV and to Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle. Which one would heaven choose? Which one would fall? Which one would rise? No one in the Vatican, no one in the entire world, could have ever imagined the ending written by heaven itself.